It's time for the Bible Geek.
Robert M. Christ. We don't really know for sure what is and what is not.
Holy Ghost.
Yahweh. Gnostic. God blasted my spot.
Ghost.
Yes, friends, it's time for the Bible Geek. Interpretation. Startle. Jesus. Homiletical. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
First Bible Geek of December 2015. I hope I get through this. The computer is acting up in bizarre ways, but we'll see if we can get a geek out of this. Let's see. First one from Paul Best. I assume he left out his middle name of the. Now, is the angel of death used for reasons similar to the angel of Yahweh? Is it an appearance of a god who has been deemed too holy to appear on stage himself? Well, Apostle, this is a really intriguing, fascinating possibility, but I have to admit it seems to me more likely that it just means the messenger of death, the grim reaper, and he's the one who brings the message, your time's up. In fact, this reminds me of once when I was in Disney World with a friend of mine, good old John DiGiorgio. He had a bit of a sensitive stomach, and we had to take a break from our gawking and such for him to go to the infirmary there, and they gave him something and he lay down for a nap. Well, I occupied myself by wandering around and buying from one of the numerous kiosks in Disney World a great over-the-head red rubber devil mask, and so I put it on. I think I had a red shirt on anyway, and I snuck up to his cot and said, DiGiorgio, I've come for you. And so, like, that was the angel of death, basically. Did him a lot of good, too. Phil the Thrill. Based on your study both of religion broadly and the development of Christianity specifically, what is your theory as to how or why religion developed at all? How do scholars in your field believe the practice originated? I ask because your many discussions surrounding the tension between a historicized mythical Christ or a euhemerized historical Christ sometimes reminds me of an article I read once that claimed religion began with the veneration of ancestors buried in caves and gradually evolved to encompass an animistic belief that natural events had their own agency. What do you think? Well, this is kind of a competition between theories, and there's the totemism theory of the great Old Testament scholar who got into considerable trouble, I think Robertson Smith, and the animism theory of Edward Tyler, and the idea of James Fraser that religion evolved from magic, and Durkheim's idea of the social control mechanism, and then fetishism, ancestor worship, and so on. It's a little difficult for anybody to win that competition because it's always possible that religion evolved in different places and times in different ways from different origins, and I kind of think that. Generally speaking, though, I would have to say that the common function that explains why religion may have evolved even in these different ways is that it provides, as Durkheim said, a social control mechanism. And I don't mean brainwashing and things like that it's some sort of insidious thing, nor did Durkheim, I believe. It's just that the idea was once you decide to keep order and to maximize a livable society by saying certain things are wrong, meaning they're not going to be tolerated. Is theft inherently wrong? Is it ontologically wrong, as Kant would say, and so forth? Traditional theology would say, well, that may or may not be, but at the beginning you have an ad hoc arrangement. We just don't want to be stolen from. Not even the thief wants to be stolen from. And the same thing with murder, rape, all these other things. Things are going to go more pleasantly for everybody if we keep to certain rules of respecting one another's bodies, properties, lives, etc. So, somewhere along the line, again and again, people must have set up systems, and, human needs and capabilities are basically the same everywhere, so it's not too surprising that law codes everywhere are very similar in their basics. People set up these systems, and they said, okay, can't you see the point? Can't you see the utility of this? And most people could, of course, so let's do it. But there's always going to be some selfish or stupid or wicked people who just don't care, and they're going to, I just was watching one of my favorite shows, The Rifleman, yesterday, and Lucas McCain has got a couple of crooks in tow, and one of them is mocking him as a sod buster, a farmer, and that it's just the good suckers do stuff like that. He figures you should just see what you want and take it. Henry says pretty much the same thing in Goodfellas, right? You're a sap if you play by the rules. Yeah, but your predations presuppose an ordered society that you can steal from, right? So, they're inconsistent. They wouldn't like the result if, like Kant said, what if everybody were to do what you're doing? Would you like it? Nah. So we're gonna try to stop those guys, that minority that figures they're above the law, just don't care about the law. And so if we can, we will. We'll issue fines and punishments. We'll jail them. We'll kill them if necessary. That's probably enough to stop most would-be miscreants. But there are going to be people that think, I think I can commit the perfect crime. I can get away with this, and it's worth the risk. I'm going to do this, and I won't be discovered. Well, they might not be. And so the framers of society say, look, we may not be able to see you doing this, burglarizing or whatever, but the ancestors will from their heavenly realm, or God will, etc. As Hagar is quoted out of context, "Thou, God, seest me." The gods see it, so you're just fooling yourself. They're going to punish you. And my Uncle Sid was the greatest second story man I know of, and he never got caught. Well, maybe not in this life, but he's probably roasting right now somewhere else. And so all of these are sanctions to try to get decent behavior. Totemism is one form. Shamanism with ancestors who will see and punish, that's another form. So I'm kind of thinking that Durkheim explains why there is religion, and Freud, in a sort of an overlapping, not contradictory, psychological account, says that, look, people don't want to grow up. They believed when they were children that there was an absolute moral order, even if they disobeyed it. The whole idea was comforting, and they believed their parents were all wise. I mean, who do you go to with the question when you're a kid? Your parents. You assume they know what they're talking about, and they'll take care of you. You have a bad dream, they come into your room and say, look, everything's okay. Well, it must be then. I guess ultimately there is security. And then you grow up and you find out that not only are your parents not what they're cracked up to be, I know I'm not, but that there's all kinds of ambiguity and danger in the world that nobody can protect you from. So you posit that there is a heavenly daddy and or mommy, and they will protect you. Well, when they don't, of course, religion has theodicy to offer, understandings or explanations, usually pretty desperate, as to why God allowed this and that. Now, that's kind of cold comfort, isn't it? If you went into the thing thinking that God was going to protect you from disasters, but a disaster occurs anyway, well, you could say, I guess I was wrong. I guess there is no God watching out for me. But that would be even worse than your pain over the specific thing that happened, right? That's going to introduce a whole lifestyle of fear and despair. Well, you don't want that. So you say, okay, I guess God had a good reason for not saving my butt this time, but I bet next time he will, and when I get to heaven I'll find out. Or maybe he's trying to teach me something through this. Never mind that really erodes the original promise just as badly, right? God protecting you always winds up devolving into stoicism. Well, whatever happens to me is the will of God, so I guess I better make the most of it. Well, you don't even need God for that, right? Just take that view of life. You roll with the punches. But people don't like to admit they're doing that. They'd like to maintain the illusion that they do have somebody watching out for them. So I think that may explain personal religion and religious systems coincident with society. I think Durkheim explained. And then there are various other theories. There's a theory of Rene Girard and so on. I get into this in my introduction to religion course. In fact, I'm coming up with a new thing. I have courses on the Gospel of Thomas, the religions of the world, intro to religion, and I guess one or two other ones. And I will make them available for you for $100 per course, not per session, right, but per course, and you can listen to all the stuff. Let me know if you're interested. I can sure use the money, believe me. Okay, so that would be my guess. Of course, you could always say, well, God just revealed himself, but it's dubious whether that's true, and it doesn't really explain much, even if it is. Okay, thanks, Phil. Commander Scotty asks, in your view, what's the purpose of the Transfiguration story as Mark tells it? Do you think it's possible to discern any potential pre-Markan agendas for this one story, that is, functions in the tradition it may have had before Mark got a hold of it? Or do you think it's better to see it as Mark's own redactional creation? Let's see. Actually, there's a both-and notion. It seems to me it's possible it's derived from Buddhism. The idea is that the elite disciples are able to, they're at the level where they can see the Sambhogakaya, the glorified body of Jesus, as a kind of bodhisattva, that his outward form is really an illusion, kind of like in Wesley's hymn, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, veiled in flesh the Godhead see. Veiled, sort of docetic, right? And this would be too. So that's possible. But as to a pre-Markan thing, it could be very, very likely a Marcionite story, canceling out the law and the prophets, because who is it who appears with Jesus? It's Moses, chief of the creator of the Torah, and Elijah, sort of prophecy embodied. And what is it that the heavenly voice, the voice of God, says? This of Jesus, this is my beloved Son. Hear him. Now that just has to imply a contrast with Moses and Elijah, hence with the law and the prophets. So this would have been and indeed once the voice speaks, the cloud descends and it's over for Moses and Elijah, right? It's just Jesus, right? He's the only revealer of the loving God. And so that it seems to me is quite likely who you're going to listen to. So this would have come from Marcionites, who said that Jesus did come to abolish the law and the prophets, that is, the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, the both and option is that, as Bultmann suggested, this was originally an ascension story. That just as the "Thou art Peter" thing was originally a resurrection story. Isn't it odd that the New Testament, like in 1 Corinthians and Luke, say that the risen Jesus appeared first to Simon Peter, and yet there is no story of that? Well, maybe there was. Maybe it was the "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock," and so on. You find the fullest version of it in Matthew. Maybe that was the resurrection appearance to Peter. And following it would have been the assumption into heaven, or the ascension, where Jesus takes 3 disciples to a mountaintop, and a cloud receives him, just as in Acts 1, and then Bultmann said, originally it said, "and they saw no one." But once the thing has been taken away from its original conclusion position and read back into the lifetime of Jesus, you can't have that. So it says, "and they saw no one but Jesus." I find that pretty interesting. Now, was that pre-Markan or was it proto-Markan? Is it possible that an earlier version of Mark had that? On that assumption, I've put together a version of what I am guessing Marcus or Proto-Mark would have looked like. I'm going to publish it someplace or other. And I don't know, but there's no way to tell. These are all kind of attractive theories, but that would be my confusing answer. Let's see. Greg, a sinner in the pseudopods of a blind idiot God. I'm sure many of you know where that comes from. Russian accent requested, since he's a backslidden Eastern Orthodox member. Question 1. It's been a zany election season in and around Michigan, with a truly bizarre sex scandal unfolding in the state capital. 2 married state reps were caught having an affair. As often happens after politicians are caught in flagrante delicto, there's been a lot of scripture being thrown about with the verses cited being extremely tangential to any point these 2 weenies were trying to make. This got me thinking about Robert Estienne's system of Bible citation, the familiar book, chapter, verse format we use today. Russians invented it. No, it seems to me the ubiquity of this system has warped our experience of the Bible, rendering every verse more or less equal, even if the content is banal. That's really interesting. How do you think this system has influenced biblical exegesis or even theology? It may have. Sometimes it hides natural chains of thought or action in the texts by rounding things off prematurely. Like, I always have to explain this to students if I'm talking about Genesis. Oh yeah, I think I got a Genesis course in there too, where the priestly creation account goes through all of Genesis chapter 1 and into the first couple of verses and a half of chapter 2. Well, they just didn't notice the sense division in the text. And so it now almost forces people to think that to see a wrong division, and to think that the priestly account is over at the end of verse 1, which it isn't. And there's some other stuff like that too. So I don't know how often that happens, but it does sometimes, and that definitely is a problem. They were doing the best they could. It's kind of like the AD-BC divide, right, where Dionysius Exiguus, known as Denny the Short, he messed up the date for the supposed birth time of Jesus. Yeah, okay, sorry. A little interruption there. But the thing that has created more mischief than that is the format of printing Bibles, like I believe the King James used to do, where every verse is set off like a paragraph unto itself. And that really has the effect of what you're saying, as if every verse is you can just forget the context. And so, yeah, though, of course, the risk is worthwhile, at least on the book, chapter, verse division thing, because how the heck are you going to find stuff unless you've memorized the text? I've often said I get a huge kick out of the passage in the Epistle of the Hebrews where lacking a chapter and verse system, the writer says, somewhere it says, and then he quotes one of the Psalms or something. That's a riot. But we'd all have that problem. Question 2. In Mark 14:51, we see Jesus being followed by a youth wearing a linen loincloth. I don't think it says that really. It's a sindone. He's wearing like a nightshirt. Okay. The apostles chase him off. The loincloth drops, and off he runs buck naked into the night. The life of Brian could have made a lot of hay with this incident. Truly a missed opportunity. You ain't a kidding. Who was this guy? And knowing that Greek has multiple words we translate into English as youth, neoniskos, and so forth, is there a more precise translation of the word used in describing this individual? And why were the apostles so aggressive with him? The apostles, how were they aggressive? I don't quite get you there. The crowd of guards and so on, of course, are just rounding him up as one more of the disciples, though come to think of it, they didn't grab Peter or any of the others, so I guess that question does arise. Why were they grabbing him? I mean, he apparently ran, leaving the sindone in their hands. They just escaped by the skin of his teeth, so to speak. Who was he? Well, I think my student Charles Ensminger suggested it's supposed to be Peter. Could be, but I don't know if he'd be called a young man. I guess one theory of apologists is that he was Mark, and therefore Mark is an eyewitness of the gospel. No, there's not a chance of that. I mean, some smart people have suggested that, like Gordon Fee, a teacher of mine, but I just don't think there's any reason to think that. Of course, I sympathize because it is so weird. Any theory starts looking good, right? But I think that, one other possibility, if you take seriously Morton Smith's secret gospel, I tend to think it's a hoax, though I hope it's not. Then we've got another possible ID. There is this unnamed young man who's dead. What is he, dead or sick unto death? I forget now, my gosh. But they prevail upon Jesus to go in where he's lying, and he raises him up, and then Jesus makes a disciple out of him. He comes to him that night. He's naked, just wearing a linen garment, a sindone, which was the standard baptismal costume. And Jesus teaches him the mysteries of the kingdom and presumably baptizes him. Could this be the guy? He followed Jesus as a disciple, so he's there in Gethsemane, and is that him in the empty tomb? Because there's a young man in white. Could be. Now, is he supposed to be a historical character? I tend to think that he's supposed to simply be a kind of a symbol, like the beloved disciple for a disciple. As a friend of mine, Gaetano Salomon, pointed out in a really brilliant piece, clothing is used as a metaphor for discipleship throughout Mark. Think of the demoniac who's running around naked, but after Jesus heals him and he wants to go with Jesus from there on in, become a disciple, he's now clothed. When I think there's other examples, can't quite think offhand, but the young man runs away and leaves his clothing, that is his faithful discipleship, behind. And yet when we see him again, assuming he's the same guy, but that's not an outrageous assumption, inference, at the tomb, he's wearing it again. So he's come back to discipleship, and he was the first witness of the resurrection, if that's what you think. Obviously, John and Matthew take him to be an angel, because angels were sometimes depicted as sort of semi-incognito, as young men or children. So, that could be, that's a valid inference. But if this is supposed to be like John Q. Disciple, and it's a kind of an allegory of gaining and losing and regaining discipleship, that would make some sense. That's kind of the way the approach I like the best. But we'll never know, right? Thanks, Greg, and good luck with Azathoth. Okay. Who is this one? Gotta scroll down. Jason Quackenbush. It struck me recently that John's Gospel seems more involved with John the Baptist's movement than do the synoptics. I seem to recall having heard that someone had suggested that the Johannine circle had resulted from a schism within the Mandean movement, but I haven't been able to locate where I originally saw that theory. Bultmann says it in his commentary on John. Are you familiar with this hypothesis? And you point me to a book, sorry, jumped the gun, or an article about it. I would be surprised if I came up with the idea on my own. Bultmann says that the prologue poem of the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, etc., was originally written by a John the Baptist Gnostic sectarian, i.e. a Mandean. Gnostics who believed John the Baptist was the real Messiah or incarnation, and that Jesus was a false Messiah. And that this guy became a Christian and applied the thing to Jesus, and that he does, therefore, have this agenda to get fellow John the Baptist followers to come jump ship and join Christianity. And that's why he's got John actually sending his own disciples to leave him and follow Jesus. And to say, when a disciple says, Master, this guy from Nazareth, he's making more disciples and baptizing more than you. And he's like, look, you think I'm worried about that? I only came as Ed McMahon to say, here's Jesus. I'm happy enough to just do my more modest role. Don't worry about me. Well, you can kind of tell what's going on there, right? And the idea of Jesus baptizing people, that's just got to stand for early Christian baptism. That it's commenting on the fact that, look, you quit Brand X and come over to Ajax or whatever. We're out competing you in the baptism department. Come on, join a winner. And then you notice that there is this prosaic interruption in the prologue of John, where it says a man was sent from God. His name was John. He wasn't the light. Let's get that straight. But he came to bear witness to the light. So there's that anxiety lest, let's say just you want to correct the original Mandean reading of it and say, no, he has a subordinate role. Now, there were some early Christians that just wrote John off as the father of false prophecy. They just took the direct approach in their polemics with the Mandeans, but not John. He converted, and he has nothing bad to say about John. He just decided to go with this, he rationalized it in the way Christians were already rationalizing it, and invited others to say, look, hey, John is a saint in our pantheon too. We like him, but Jesus is number one. What about it? And so, yeah, that certainly seems to be the case. Plus, one sticking point in Mandean or John the Baptist sectarian polemics against Christianity was that John had to be the real Messiah, not Jesus. Because after all, who was baptized by whom? Right? Well, Matthew doesn't like that either, and he deals with it a different way. He has John see Jesus coming, and he says, what's a nice Savior like you doing in a place like this? I ought to be baptized by you. Why are you coming to me? Well, okay. That solves that one. Well, in John, the solution is that John didn't baptize Jesus. He merely pointed him out to the crowd. Take a look at John. Do you see any baptism there? Nope. So, yeah, that's what's going on in that one. Luke, though, has the same sort of anxiety, which is why he parallels the nativities of John the Baptist and Jesus, both of them kind of based on the nativity of the prophet Samuel. Right? And he has two separate stories, I think, derived from the two different groups, but he's linked them with, like the little crossbar and an H. He's linked them with this weird tale about Mary going to the home of Zechariah and Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's pregnant and says, oh, the babe jumped in my womb at the approach of your kid, the holy fetus of Antioch. And so this is based on Jacob and Esau in the womb and all that. It's a rewrite, and it's trying to say John is subservient to Jesus. So, one other thing, the baptism story, it becomes so pointlessly convoluted in Luke that he's got John the Baptist arrested and let off in handcuffs before he tells you Jesus was baptized. So Jesus gets baptized in a subordinate clause in the passive voice, almost as if to confuse the reader. Wait a minute, who baptized him? Rather than making a big deal that John did. And when Luke has the scene where he takes the well-known, I guess, Q passage, or is it Mark? I forget. Where he says, one mightier than I is coming, and John says, and I'm not even worthy to tie his sneakers laces. Luke prefaces that with an interpretation. He says, all men were wondering in their hearts whether John might be the Messiah. So he makes this statement an answer to that, implying, oh, no, you got the wrong guy. I'm just the front man. So Luke's, and then there's the thing in chapter 19, I think it is, of Acts, where Paul meets disciples of John the Baptist, and you find out what a cut-rate baptism they had. They didn't even know about the Holy Spirit, and so forth. So, yeah, Luke has a definite agenda anti-John the Baptist as well. Okay, so another question, right, from Jason. Regarding the Christology of the synoptics, it strikes me, everybody knows, right, synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It strikes me that adoptionism is the most obvious view to explain the episode of the temptations of Christ in the desert. Further, it seems difficult to reconcile the temptations to a non-adoptionist Christology. After all, if Jesus was eternally Christ and the Son and the Father are of one substance, what on earth does Satan think he's doing by testing Jesus' vanity? Notable in relation to this, I would argue, is that John doesn't mention the temptation on the mountain at all. Right you are, O great one. Yeah, even if Satan is supposed to be the tester, as he is in the Old Testament, and not a villain, and I know you're not suggesting that, we still have the same problem. Testing for what? I mean, this really ultimately goes back to the old thing in Hebrews. He was tempted at every point, even as we are, but he resisted. Oh boy, does that mean he had the opportunity to sin but never took advantage of it? Or he was, boy, I sure would like to turn those stones to bread, but I guess I won't. Like I swore off of sausage biscuits about 4 months ago. Now I'm not really tempted. I know they're available, but I ain't going to do it anymore. Well, how tempted am I really if I have that resolution, right? But it's worse with Jesus, a cosmic entity. How deep does his humanity go? Karl Barth figured that to be a real human, he must have had a fallen human nature, even though he didn't actually sin. But that's a good question. Could he have sinned? If he couldn't, what does that say about his righteousness? If he can't help being righteous, is it righteous? Or isn't there an inherent element of the possibility of sinning and the virtue of resisting it? Boy, I don't know. That's a real stumper. I don't know how that's, if that's ever been settled to anybody's satisfaction. I suppose people have their own opinions, but that's kind of what's going on there. Like, if his human nature is really icing on the divine cake, there certainly would be no point in the testing any more than there was with the baptism, right, in Matthew, where Jesus says, yeah, you're right, I don't need to be baptized by you, but let's do it anyway. It's fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness, which I think means to keep all righteous practices. Is that it? Or in John, where he prays that God may raise Lazarus. And he said, well, of course I knew you would. I'm just, this is just stage words for the audience here. Is that what's going on? It's kind of docetic in that case. So I agree with you. The thing that fits the best is if Jesus is adopted, the Son of God, and now we'll test him out and see what he's made of. And that would make sense also even with Matthew and Luke with their birth narratives, assuming the traditional reading of them, that Jesus winds up being a demigod. That still opens up the possibility of sin and failure, like Hercules. So you would the testing would be at home there, but I think it does make the most natural sense on an adoptionist Christology. I'm with you, Jason. Let's see. This is from Mark. I'm fascinated by the so-called proto-Gnostic Cerinthus and his absence, that everything known about Cerinthus is derived from refutations his opponents leveled at his arguments, would seem to indicate that the man had a great influence. To what extent have the extrapolated theories of Cerinthus informed Christian dogma and scholarship? Were Cerinthus's assertions so threatening as to require the complete eradication of his work? Well, that's true of virtually all the heretics, right? We just managed to find in Nag Hammadi a copy of Valentinus's Gospel of Truth, but the other ones, who knows what they said, right? What books about Cerinthus can you recommend? To tell you the truth, I don't know any. He'd be considered in a history of Gnosticism, but I don't know if there's enough known about him to write a whole book on him. If there is, I'd like to know. In his absence, oh brother, there goes that computer screen again. In his absence, Cerinthus seems to be the mold upon which the dogma of his day was cast. One more question. What do you think are the odds of finding a copy of the Gospel of Cerinthus stashed away in a jar anywhere? Have you checked your bookshelves? I'm currently reading the complete works of Cerinthus. In fact, probably wouldn't take as long to do that as my reading that sentence, right? We're told that Cerinthus believed in Jesus as a channeler, right? That the Christ Spirit descended upon him at his baptism. And I believe Michael Golder suggests that is what Mark thought. And I agree with him. Some kind of adoptionistic thing like that. We are also told he was a chiliast, or a believer in a physical, literal, millennial reign of Christ at the second coming, which some didn't like and which was a little unusual for Gnostics. He was a Jewish Gnostic. It's kind of interesting because some have thought the opponents in the Pauline epistles were Jewish Gnostics. You read Colossians and it does kind of make some sense. Spiritual circumcision and so on. The most interesting thing about him that I have read is that he believed, if I've got this right, this is my understanding of what I've read, that he believed Jesus had not yet risen but would rise at the general resurrection, presumably pretty soon. Now, I think that's an interesting piece of evidence that was the original idea of the resurrection. All this stuff about Jesus being the first fruits of the resurrection. What's the first fruits? Well, the first part of the same crop to come ripe. That implies there's not much time. Once he rises, the rest of the resurrection is going to happen. But it didn't. I don't think they would use the first fruit thing if they anticipated the possibility of a big delay. So I'm guessing Cerinthus's idea was a very early Christian notion, but all we have is fragments, so it's pretty tough to say. I have this theory that, let me see. Who wrote the book A Separate God? Simone Pétremont. She thought that there weren't any Cerinthians, that this was a kind of a pun on Corinthians, and some of the Gnostic type stuff you find in 1 Corinthians was somebody made that into a sect and called it the Cerinthians. I think it's more likely it's just the reverse, that there was a Gnostic sect called the Cerinthians, and the so-called epistles to Corinth are really about Gnostic Christians, and they picked Cerinthus's name on there, so it's a pun on Cerinthians that we have Corinthians. Of course, there was a town called Corinth, but that's the wink to the reader. You're supposed to see something beneath it. Okay, that's what I think, Mighty Mark. This is from Joe C., initial Fuss. Joe C. Fuss, yes. Let's see, I was raised nominally Christian in the southeastern U.S. My mother never cracked a Bible, and my father was and is agnostic. My grandmother's a Pentecostal, and she used to pray with me at night, and my sister and mother and I occasionally went to church with her. Let's see. Around the age of 10, I had kind of an epiphany when I realized that all religions claim exclusive truth. I didn't know anything about Eastern religions at the time, and therefore more than one of them can't be right. I saw no basis for choosing any one of them and decided they were probably all false. I did, however, become interested in occultism and enjoyed reading a book I found in the school library about spells and sorcery. In my mid-teens, I was introduced to Buddhism by an older friend, and it appealed to me greatly. I quickly accepted it along with the supernatural elements. I found it very liberating, and I very much enjoyed having a transcendent and mystical lens through which to view reality. I gradually fell out of it as I became more involved in very worldly social activity. When I was 17, some slightly older friends whose intellect I greatly respected began to discuss the Bible, and I realized that they were Christians. I had thought for years that Christianity was for the ignorant and superstitious masses, but their acceptance of it forced me to change that view. That same year, my favorite band at the time released an album that had overt references to Christianity. I picked up a New Testament and started reading Matthew. With my background in Buddhism, the cynic-type material in the Sermon on the Mount greatly appealed to me. I began to interpret events in my life as God drawing me toward Christianity. By the age of 22, I was married and had been reading the Bible from the beginning for about a year. I became a literalist, and the Bible I was reading was a study Bible called Life in the Spirit, and the annotations were written by a Pentecostal. Were they all in glossolalia, I wonder? Sorry. In my footnote 2, Shambhalikasi, I had my coming to God moment in the midst of a crisis in my marriage and a heightened desire for personal change. I began to read through Romans 1 and felt that God was speaking to me through it. I felt condemned and terrified and surrendered to God, begging for the new heart promised in Ezekiel, or was it Jeremiah? It's Ezekiel, but you're right, it has to do with the new covenant theme, which you find in both of them. This surrender of myself gave me a liberated feeling, which I experienced mentally as a heavy burden being lifted and a pleasant tingling all over my body. I began rocking back and forth and confessing all my sins. My wife was present the whole time, and uttering doxologies that were completely different than my ordinary mode of speech. I took this to be both my initial salvation and a baptism in the Spirit. However, from that very day I began to struggle with doubt. Since I'd thrown my whole life into Christianity, it immediately became much more important that the Bible is actually true. But I couldn't quite turn off my critical thinking. I started seeing holes all over the Bible and spent much effort trying mentally to patch them up. I got into apologetics both to quell my doubts and to convert an atheist friend. I eventually took a few online courses in apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary. I became very good at making Christianity sound plausible and poured into it my skills of argumentation that I'd earlier picked up from reading Plato. Later, I began debating atheists on Twitter. One fellow recommended some books, which I read. I couldn't in good conscience ignore this information that the atheist found so convincing. The books were Why We Believe in God, parenthesis, S, close parenthesis, by Thompson and Aukofer, A-U-K-O-F-E-R. Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me, by Tavris and Aronson, and Free Will by Sam Harris. These books shook me up terribly. Not long after, I was an agnostic. There goes the darn screen again. I gotta take this thing to the computer doctor when I get some money in the bank. Come on, where is that? Okay, there we are. I had always told my unbelieving friends that if provided with adequate information and arguments, I would reject Christianity, and so I did. I struggled for months with a fear of hell, and this was helped by reading Why I Believed by Kenneth Daniels, which I highly recommend. He struggled with the same process and details the reasons that his belief persisted long after he'd lost any rational reason to continue it. Is this the guy that was a missionary? That was 3 years ago. I'm 29 now, and I've gotten back into Buddhism, though without the supernatural aspects. I guess I'm just one of those people who need some type of spiritual or mystical dynamic in my life. I have no problem reconciling this with a more or less naturalistic worldview. I think you're right. You can very easily be an atheist, a naturalist, and a Buddhist. I think modern science has confirmed, Sam Harris is a Buddhist. I think that modern science has confirmed many of the Buddhist teachings, particularly impermanence and no self. the anika and anatta doctrines. Philosophers like Kant have also buttressed the idea that our whole perception of the world is an artificial mental construct, or at least unreliable as a model of reality. You know, Kant said that whatever the heck it is, out there is the undifferentiated manifold of perception, and whatever the heck it is strikes our senses and is filtered through the categories of perception and the logical functions of judgment to construct what we see and hear and so forth, but who knows what it's actually about. Horror fans, I would recommend a tale by Ramsey Campbell called The Render of the Veils. It's all about that. This guy creates a machine that enables you to see beyond the senses into the undifferentiated manifold of perception, and it ain't pretty. Anyway, sorry. Also, the interconnection of all things. Interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh, if that's how you say it, calls it. I'll tell you what's impermanent. There we go, the screen, yeah. It's the interconnection of all things is readily seen from a cursory examination of the world around us. Dwelling on these things helps me to feel liberated amidst the vicissitudes of life. Also, the practical teachings and directions, such as the Eightfold Path, help me to deal with my self-control, which has never been a strength of mine. Fascinating. Thanks a bunch. I always much enjoy people's religious autobiographies, and I'm sure most geeks do too, so keep them coming. Now for my question. Have you ever thought about the youth who... Oh my gosh, here we go. Here he is again. Have you ever thought about the youth who fled naked in Mark as being derived from Joseph fleeing from Potiphar's wife? In both stories, the person is grabbed by his robe and flees, leaving it behind. I'd been pondering this part of Mark for a while, and one night in bed, the story with Joseph popped into my head. I found an article that made the connection and showed some shared verbiage between Mark and the Joseph incident as told in the Septuagint. The connection seems very clear. What would the significance have been for Mark? It's still an oddity and a mystery, even with the knowledge of its ultimate origin. The context seems totally different. Joseph was fleeing temptation, while Mark's youth is simply fleeing from fear for his safety. What does a geek make of this? Boy, that is a tough one. Of course, it's possible that given the brevity of the statement, that it's just sheer chance that the Greek of the description of a similar incident would come out the same way. I mean, how many possibilities are there? But you gotta wonder, because so much of the Gospels does appear to be rewrites of the Septuagint. Let's see now. Joseph is a precursor to Jesus, both of them stemming from Osiris, ultimately, I think. And this incident with Joseph leads to his being thrown into prison. And the Gethsemane scene leads to the crucifixion of Jesus. But of course, the young man in the garden can't really be Jesus. Not even on a docetic reading. Because the real one would be the guy that escapes. Like Barabbas might be originally a docetic episode, the real Jesus, son of the Father, escaping. So that wouldn't fit the Joseph original. Beyond that, nothing pops into my head. I'll have to think about that, and that is a really fascinating observation. It never occurred to me. I believe the notion of someone throwing off their coat and getting up and running, that appears in the Bartimaeus story, And I think I read an article some time ago where this guy found the same phrase in various ancient works, and that it was almost a kind of a metaphor. I mean, not that it wasn't supposed to actually have happened, but that you would make that comment to suggest the desperate character of the situation and the urgency of the person leaving. It kind of equivalent to Mark 13, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, head for the hills. If you're up fixing your thatched roof, go down the fire escape and flee. Don't go inside to get your coat. So it may just be a colorful way of saying it's just getting the hell out of there. Don't want to read too much into it, but I don't think you are. I think that bears more investigation. I appreciate you mentioning that, Joe. But let me know if you come up with anything else. Anybody else? Any ideas? I'm sure, Dr. Barton, you must have some idea. So, David from Romania. Hi, Dr. Price. I've wanted for a long time to know your opinion about The Jesus-Driven Life by Michael Hardin. Could you please review it on your website? Or to comment a little bit on it on the Bible Geek show. I would really be interested to see your opinion. Or at least your general opinion about Rene Girard and his view on Jesus and the Gospel. Thanks and good luck. David, I have never heard of this book, and I don't have time to get it and read it now. But if it has something to do with Girard, I was just writing about him. I would suggest you take a look at my book, Deconstructing Jesus, because I have a whole chapter in there about the way Girard deals with the passion narratives. He has a lot of amazingly fascinating things to say about the scapegoat and how people are scapegoated as sacrifices to redeem a social situation, social sacrificial crisis, as he calls it. And it seems to me, my basic reading on this is, it's very plausible, and it does seem to unlock a bunch of Bible stories as well as other myths. But the problem is, late in life he converted to Christianity and could no longer see what is obvious to me, that the passion narratives are the most clear example of what he's talking about, and he says that no, they're trying to expose the scapegoat mechanism and all that. I just don't buy it. I think he kind of flinches in faith. It's like, I got a good political thing, but I don't want to raise hell here. A good political analogy. He just can't see it, and I think what he says applies not only well to Jesus, but Jesus in the Gospels is the best example of it. So if you can get a hold of it, I would recommend my chapter, In the Beginning Was the Deed, in Deconstructing Jesus. So, I guess I ought to can it there. I got a student calling, and before too long. Again, if you'd like to just donate to the Bible Geek, my family and I can sure use it. I mean, paying the darn bills and all that stuff, rendering unto Caesar, etc. If you would like to, I'm out of copies of Moses and Minimalism, by the way. It's still in print. I just have run through my stack of contributors' copies, so please do order it off Amazon or whatever. My collection of Tillich's unreprinted essays, The Ground of Being, Neglected Essays of Paul Tillich, ought to be coming out from Amazon Create Space pretty soon. And if you would like to order one of these courses and listen to it, send me $100. So, okay, that's it for the Bible Geek today. I'll be seeing you before Christmas. Ho, ho, ho.